Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, January 22nd, 2018. We're still here. It was just a week ago that we were coming off of a wacky weekend under possible incoming ballistic missile threat. Hey, how about the traffic? Time to check in. Beautiful weather across the East Coast today. Yeah, we have already forgotten about that. By the way, I was reminded in my Twitter review this morning, we are already over Stormy Daniels. We've moved on. The president has, it's come out that, he wasn't president then, that he's having sex with porn stars at golf tournaments, at which he does terribly, by the way. I think that's the biggest scandal of all, is how bad a golfer Donald Trump actually is, despite the fact that he brags of being PGA level golfer good. I don't know what this PGA level something, anyway. And we find out that, of course, he conducts what I guess Stormy Daniels was somehow characterizing as a year-long affair. I don't think that it was necessarily the case, but they did meet and, I don't know what. Yeah, they met and then had some form of sex. I don't really need to comment on exactly what kind. At least twice, and there was probably some time in between the two meetings at both the Lake Tahoe golf outing and the Beverly Hills Hotel at some point as well, where they met in the bungalow and watched Shark Week. Yum. And Trump was spanked with a rolled-up Forbes magazine with himself and his other family members on the cover. It's a fantastic story, and we've moved on from there. Ballistic missile threat didn't come through, but scared the crap out of everybody in Hawaii. And government has shut down, and the president's having sex with porn stars and paying them off with shell companies under assumed names and whatever, man. And we'll have Greg here to tell us why it all matters, even though it feels like it doesn't. And, well, I don't know. I guess we always just have to be patient with this stuff. Government is shut down here in the Washington, D.C. area. That means a very special kind of Monday morning, as people are forced to report to work and then be turned away from work and go back home. That includes government employees, but also many, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of contractors and workers for government contractors who have to come in and be told, we don't know exactly what the hell's going on, but you'd better go home and don't count on being paid because of all the jobs being created. Hooray, economy. All right, so we'll catch up with the events of the weekend. Donald Trump spent the shutdown watching television, apparently, as usual. Why they didn't shut off his television and his ice cream freezers, I'm not sure. Those don't seem like essential services to me. But the president very often takes a different view of such things. And the last 24 hours of his tweeting prior to this morning's outbursts, where I took a look. I've reviewed his Sunday, first Sunday of the government shutdown. 6 of 8 of his tweets during that 24-hour period about television shows that he was watching, basically. He's watching TV and tweeting about TV. And then he spent the weekend watching, apparently, according to reports, clips of himself bashing Barack Obama for the 2013 government shutdown, as though that were, I guess that's some sort of highlight reel for him. We're about that close. Between that and the Shark Week obsession thing, I'm not positive that it was entirely false that the president demanded that a fake TV channel be created for him to watch. I mean, there was the Gorilla Channel story, and yeah, it was fake and meant as parody, but I don't know how he puts together clips of him. Does he ask someone to put together clips of himself? Or does he watch clips on YouTube? The kids these days, they watch on, they'll start off with a clip on YouTube and it suggests another one, and that may be how he's watching. It just doesn't seem like he's that tech savvy. Or is he like the kids from the movie Big, where they used the secretary, bring me a videotape of the giant Super Bowl and edit out all the commercials. You remember that scene? He may be asking people for that, and they may be delivering it. They're happy to keep him, as long as he's quiet and stays in his room, they're happy to run the government on his behalf. Lots of people talking about the reality of the situation being that we're living under President Miller, Stephen Miller, or perhaps President Kelly, hoping, I think, to get under his skin, Trump's skin, and irritate him. This is orange skin. I don't know if you can tell when it's irritated or not. But we'll give it a try. Lots of other things happening over the weekend. The president, of course, missed his trip to Mar-a-Lago. That's 2 rounds of golf he didn't play, and he must be steaming. Plus, of course, he missed the big party at which he was going to pay himself a couple $100,000 as well. Lots of reporting out of that event. They went ahead with the party. They love a party, those Palm Beach people. And by the way, I've seen some photos coming out of there. They all look the same. It's very weird. But I guess they all go to the same plastic surgeons, and I guess it's to be expected. Bill took note of the same events all the way up in Portland, Maine. He tweets us this morning's kickoff tweet. Daily Coast Radio is live now. That's what this whole thing has been about. This is a total disgrace. Shame on me, actually, Kagro X, David Waldman, for using a plastic microphone stand instead of mother of pearl. I try to use only the best products, of course. There were a couple of Instagram complaints over the weekend from people who paid minimum $100,000 per couple to attend the party, the anniversary party of, I guess, of Donald Trump's inauguration. But unfortunately, he was stuck in the White House. It was his own decision. He could certainly have flown off, but he was afraid of the optics of it all, going off to party with rich people at Mar-a-Lago. They went ahead and had the party anyway, and at least some of them were horrified to find plastic serving spoons being used for the caviar being offered there. You have to have caviar because I saw on Gilligan's Island where Thurston Howell is constantly eating caviar, and it's very important for rich people to be able to do that. There was a Supertramp song that taught me to eat kippers for breakfast. This is how I learned to be a billionaire. And apparently you're supposed to use, I don't know, they say mother of pearl spoons to do that. I do understand there's just some interesting reactions with caviar and the serving implements. You have to have certain kinds. I thought it was always bone spoons that they used, but I guess mother of pearl will do just fine if you like everything spray painted gold. Greg Dworkin is here with us to tell us what he uses to serve his caviar. Is your preference different from Abby's, or do you both eat out of the can, or what?
I only serve caviar to the dog.
Okay. Well, yeah, so she doesn't use any
I can't
spoons
afford
at
it,
all.
No. So I sacrifice everything.
There's no money left for spoons after that.
There's no money left, so she eats out of a bowl.
Okay. Well, that's an all right thing to do.
But it's a mother of pearl bowl.
Oh, well, it has to be, because otherwise it ruins the caviar somehow. There is some sort of weird reaction, although I thought that was with silver, and I guess it's probably everything in caviar. Right. You probably just don't eat it. It's not good for you.
It's actually not really caviar that I feed her. I just tell her it is, but she's a dog, so she doesn't know.
That could be right. Yeah, this is. It could be. It's. This
is the caviar of dog
pet.
foods. Here, just eat it.
I believe it. Chuck wagon. I chased it through the cabinet. I know it's good.
Mm-hmm. So we have the shutdown thing.
Yes.
And, there's a lot of really interesting stuff about it. Just to catch you up on the news,
mm-hmm.
I don't think it's really changed since last night. Robert Costa from the Washington Post tweets, when Schumer did not object to the vote at noon tomorrow, meaning today, on that tweaked version of the CR that goes to February 8th, that was that, as far as negotiations yesterday.
Okay.
It was all put on pause. Both leaders are giving a little in their own way, but staying in their corners, at least tonight. Stephen Dennis tweeted, McConnell, by my count, is 7 short of 60 votes without more flippers. Flippers being people like Jeff Flake, who said, oh, well, it's compromise, and you've promised me that somehow you'll handle this, Leader McConnell, so that's good enough for me.
I'm glad he's so trusting. I am not. But
yeah. Well, so here's how that works.
It doesn't.
The whole idea of what's going on here, I mean, it needs to be said, is that the entire reason for the shutdown has everything to do, and this is what we're going to talk about in my segment today.
Okay.
With how the Democratic Party's changing.
Okay.
But also how the trust between Democrats and congressional Republicans, let alone the White House, is zero. And therefore, the idea that Republicans are going to bring up a DACA vote at some point becomes Republicans are going to bring up a DACA vote at some point in 2072.
Right.
And so nobody on the Democratic Party believes a single assurance without a little bit more proof. And at this point, it's not even enough for McConnell to swear on the Bible and the Quran and the Torah and 17 other things that he will on February 9th, bring up a DACA vote if it hasn't been settled by then without some kind of discussion with Paul Ryan in the House where there are the votes to pass it if it's brought to the floor, but Ryan refuses. And how is McConnell supposed to negotiate for Ryan? Furthermore, why is Ryan doing this? Because the Republican Party has gone so hard right on immigration that they feel like it's almost impossible to do anything else. So let's start with a nice Karen Tumulty, Michael Shear story in the Washington Post just to set things up. And this one is called Shutdown, a familiar partisan ritual takes on new meaning in the Trump era.
Okay.
I have all of these. There it is. I have all of these in the pundit roundup as well. But this one points out that here's what happens. So Bill Galston, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, an ex-Clintonite, Bill Clintonite. What's at stake in the immigration fight is a clash between two visions of our future, or, if you want to be literal about it, a clash between our future and our past. Both sides have pushed a large pile of chips on the table. Democrats have insisted their leaders dig in on extending an Obama-era program known as Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, offering protection against deportation to an estimated 800,000 undocumented immigrants brought to this country's children. The president demanded funding for his proposed border wall and other security measures.
Yes.
Security measures.
Yes, right.
The political ramifications are not obvious, notwithstanding the hashtag war branding the impasse either the Schumer shutdown, which, by the way, or the Trump shutdown, which, by the way, succeeded. That's the one that's trending.
Yes.
Who gets the blame, or if voters even care about the shutdown, remains to be seen. Much will depend upon how long it lasts and whether it damages the economy. While polls show large majorities are sympathetic to the plight of the undocumented immigrants, most also say keeping the government open is a higher priority. The wall, on the other hand, is largely unpopular outside of Trump's base. So the balance of power was different in previous years, and now it's happening as and because the two parties are in the process of reorienting themselves in ways their top strategists once warned against. This is the important part of the story and the ones to follow. That, in turn, reflects a shifting attitudes among their voters. When the Pew Research Center asked Americans in 1994 if immigrants strengthen the country because of their hard work and talent, 32% of Democratic-leaning voters and 30% of Republican-leaning voters answered yes. But same question, in 2017, 84% on the Democratic side agreed immigrants are a strength, and 42% on the Republican side, which is a gap of 42 points. So it's good that the Republicans, for the most part, are a bit more positive about immigrants than back in 1994.
I guess so, yes.
Between the parties are enormous.
Right.
Okay?
I can see that.
Put it different. As recently as a decade ago, Democrats were leery of looking too permissive on immigration, anxious to avoid election year attacks over giving government benefits to the undocumented. And now it's changed. I didn't like the way Karen phrased it, Karen Tumulty here. I yelled at her about it. The Democratic stance on immigration is now defined from the increasingly impatient left. Yeah, we're impatient, but I don't know why centrist policies are defined as left. And she's sort of defended it as, well, that's traditionally how you look at it. Protesters who support a path to citizenship have in recent years made their mark by disrupting events by leaders like President Obama and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. And Frank Shary, leader of the America's Voice liberal organization that supports a path to citizenship of the undocumented, says it's a remarkable shift to see Democrats leaning into the issue. Now, conservative activists are happy about where their party is. And the base is happy that there was a shutdown on the Democratic side because we think you can't really trust anybody on the Republican side to do the right thing unless they're forced. Further, there's a sense on the Democratic side that this is all fun and games, smoke and mirrors, because what they really have in mind is a good deal worse. And what I mean by that, I sent you a little tweet list here. Want to go over because I think it's pretty fascinating. From David Byer. It's the second item on your list that I sent this morning.
Okay.
Okay, and let's see what he did with it.
He threw it out. Oh, my God.
Oh, my God. There it is. So it's a discussion which starts on January 21st, a little further down for you, and I'll send it to you so you can read it easier.
Okay.
It's rather long, but it gives you an idea of what's going on here. So let me start with this one, and I'll send that to you. And just talks about the differences between the House bill and the Senate bill.
Okay.
The House GOP DACA bill would criminalize legalized dreamers if they fail to maintain an income insufficiently above the poverty line.
Oh, yes. That was a weird thing I saw over the weekend. So if you're not making enough money, you're now even more illegal somehow.
It requires them to maintain an annual income of at least 125% of the poverty line. If they fall below that level for 90 days, not only are they subject to deportation again, they'd be criminals.
Sure.
So the bill literally criminalizes poverty among dreamers. David Byer is an interesting guy. He's a Cato Institute immigration analyst.
Mm.
In other words, he comes from the conservative libertarian side.
Yes.
Thinks this House bill is extreme and terrible.
Well, it is. Yeah, that tells you something.
The House GOP demands in exchange for DACA an endless list of extreme demands, but the worst part is the bill isn't even a real solution for dreamers. Its provisions show the GOP isn't willing to accept them as Americans, at most just criminals on parole. For example, in general, it says in the House bill, this is the Good Lottie bill, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the Secretary may grant contingent non-immigrant status to an alien who meets the eligibility requirements set forth in subsection C, submits a complete application, and has paid the fees. So it offers DACA recipients non-immigrant status, but unlike immigrants, non-immigrants are admitted for a temporary period for a specific purpose without a pathway to citizenship. So right off the bat, we know House GOP isn't thinking of dreamers as a permanent part of America. That's the basis for how the GOP, certainly the House GOP, Ryan supports this bill, is approaching the DACA issue. So when Democrats hear that Republicans are willing to discuss it, the implication, given that this is the supported bill on the House side, is that this is a solution they're willing to discuss.
And that's the only one?
And that's the only one. So is that acceptable? It's not acceptable. That's why the government shut down.
Yeah. Well, that is pretty terrible. And by the way, a good reminder for longtime listeners, whenever you hear, notwithstanding any other provision of law, that is a huge tip-off from the Legislative Counsel's office that what is being proposed is probably a complete departure from all other provisions of law. In other words, it's a provision that someone has come up with that they said, why don't we just blah, blah, blah? And Legislative Counsel said, well, that would be illegal. And then they say, oh, well, then put in notwithstanding any other provision of law. That'll help. And that's the stock phrase that you stick in front of something that would otherwise be a gigantic problem with every other provision of law.
So I'm going to give you a couple here in a row, and both of them you can find on your Skype feed because they have the hashtag Trump shutdown as part of their pictures.
Okay, let's take a
that
look.
they put up there. The first one is called What the Shutdown Reveals About the Democratic Party. I thought this was fascinating. It was written by a political scientist, Matt Grossman, and it's in Politico over the weekend. Politico, their weekend magazine.
You can roll that up and hit the president with it.
Yeah, which is really fun because it's like on a computer, so it like really hurts.
It's his choice, man. I don't know.
I don't know. I didn't do it. What the shutdown reveals about the Democratic Party. 1 year into Trump's presidency, one political party has been transformed, and it's not the GOP.
Oh.
Okay? The government shutdown greeting, his administration's first anniversary, shows he's remade the major political party, pushing it toward a new strategy and a new identity, but it's not the Republicans, it's the Democrats.
Oh, dang it. Maybe it's
Republicans are the same party of conservative brinkmanship they were last year, but Democrats are pursuing a harder line strategy of unified opposition focused on social issues.
Oh, that may be good then.
Whereas they greeted a new George W. Bush administration with cooperation on education reform and acquiescence on tax cuts, Democrats have loudly opposed all Trump administration initiatives, facing pressure from an energized base. We'll talk about that base in a minute. The Republican Reformation is not materialized. But look at the Democrats. Inside Congress, they demanded action to restore protection for immigrants who entered the U.S. illegally as children in order to vote on a government funding bill. And you could do a whole segment about language, about aliens and undocumented versus and all that sort of stuff. Their liberal base copied the minority intransigence of the Republicans using online media and activism to hold legislators to a hard line. In the grassroots, they organized massive women's marches across dozens of American cities, marking a full year of relentless progressive activism. And although the media didn't cover it all that deeply or broadly, yesterday's and the day before, Saturday and Sunday women's marches all over the country were in many cases higher volume than the ones from a year ago.
Yeah, and by far higher volume than the half a dozen weirdos in tricorn hats and tea bags that they covered relentlessly.
So, the idea, I remember last year, after the women's marches, well, that's really impressive, a lot of people, but can they sustain this kind of energy? And then this year, there's even more energy. Okay, well, they can sustain the energy, but how many of them are really registering? And
half of them are running for office.
Exactly. So, we're going to wind up seeing that, in November. New polling from ABC Washington Post poll, the generic ballot, which has been cut in some of the more recent polling on today's ABC Washington Post poll, is up to like 14, 15. So we'll get to that. But look at the Democrats. Inside Congress, they demanded action. Their liberal base copied the minority intransigence of the Republicans, and they organized these massive women's marches. Losing a presidential election often stimulates activism, and a new president usually provokes a backlash. But the size of the Democratic resurgence is unprecedented. Democrats have more than tripled the usual number of serious candidates challenging members of Congress. They've competed everywhere in special elections, winning in unlikely places. And this, after reaching a low in federal and state offices the party hadn't seen since the 20s. What's particularly astonishing is how Democrats have accomplished this outside the formal structure of the Democratic Party, which has often seemed irrelevant. Explicitly copying the Tea Party, they founded grassroots organizations in nearly every district to regularly call legislators, held large protests on women's issues, science, climate, and racism. More Democrats even started identifying as liberals, coming closer to mirroring the Republicans' unified conservative identity. And, interestingly, this is how he looks at it, instead of facing a factional challenge allied with Bernie Sanders, Democrats integrated his young left-wing supporters with their traditional identity-based constituencies. Elected Democrats of all stripes unified against Republicans' major two legislative initiatives, tax cuts and Obamacare repeal. All the party's allied interest groups have remained stridently anti-Trump. So when you step back and look at it, you really have had a hard time. Not that you couldn't do it because it's like you're supposed to, but it's very hard to write Democrats in disarray stories when, in fact, the party is so united. More so than, I can remember in a long, long time.
Yes, that is a good point.
Nearly every new Trump move has been treated as a five-alarm fire, with united resistance with Hillary Clinton diehards just as active as Bernie bros. They tripled the ratings for MSNBC, spurred new liberal media outlets. Some followed online conspiracy theorists who breathlessly enlarged every detail of the Russia investigation. Major Democratic donors, such as Tom Steyer, have called for the president's immediate impeachment, but the sharpest changes have been on social issues surrounding gender and race. Democrats in the electorate have moved swiftly left on race, immigration, and feminism. Trump's ban on immigration from Muslim countries even provoked an outpouring of support from Muslims. Oh, my gosh. Attitudes toward illegal immigration softened. Sexual harassment became top tier. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus gained a hearing with leaders in both chambers and is now having its concerns become the party's top priority. In other words, Democratic leaders started listening to Democratic voters.
Weird.
Isn't that weird?
That is pretty amazing, isn't
That's
it?
exactly what was warned against by the consultants from a different era, right? The
Yes.
deal types.
Oh yeah, and to bring it back to where you were with Karen Tumulty, the idea that the electorate as a whole has moved there, and you were talking about 80% or ideas with 80% popularity, and the base finds it's popular too, and the politicians begin moving that way. By the way, I guess if she wants to cling to the idea of everything's shifting left as opposed to, as you say, shifting centrist, then can we at least get an acknowledgement that the center is center left rather than center right?
This is a center-left country. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
Of course,
it can't be both.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
Left. In the middle. Something. Of course, Democrats are still a coalition of many constituency groups with different priorities. Democrats in the public and in Congress have long valued compromise more than Republicans. They'll not become a broad ideological party anytime soon, but they're actively copying Republican strategy. In the process, Democrats will learn the limits of the Republican approach. It's difficult to chalk up many wins for your constituents when you're engaged in all-or-nothing budgetary battles. Establishing and a perfect example of that.
Yes. Our break coming, by the way, 30 seconds.
Yep. The perfect example of that is CHIP. I mean, here's your chance to pass it and get it done for 6 years, but you can't because this is going on. Of course, I know who to blame. They could have done that 6 months ago, 3 months ago, and they didn't.
Yes.
So it's a strategy we'll talk about on the other side of the break.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks very much. It's still a big puzzle as to why music doesn't come through, but we'll talk about that too. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still waiting patiently with us without the benefit of music to cue him back in, but I can tell.
I was humming to myself. It was working.
Right. I got to find some way of approximating the music. I wonder if I could. Maybe come across with some echo if I plug it in this way. But okay. Well, those of you who are out there and listening on the live stream, at least you're getting the music, so that's the good news.
Right. Well, right before we're about to come on the air, you can hit that enthusiasm button, And,
yeah, that's around here somewhere.
Right.
Enthusiasm.
So I was reading from a Matt Grossman article. Now, Matt Grossman's a political scientist, and he co-authored a book with Dave Hopkins called Asymmetric Politics, Ideologic Republicans and Group Interest Democrats. So he has a whole career of studying the differences between the party. And this article talking about how the Democrats are becoming more like the Republicans in regard to their tactics is really quite interesting in that regard. And he points out that there's really not much the Democratic leaders can do about it. The base is just having none of this, let's just play nice. Let's just listen to Mitch McConnell and let's agree to not pass the thing you want us to pass on February 9th instead of not passing it now as somehow a solution to a government shutdown, for example. So we'll see what happens with the votes at noon on that. Mike Tomasky has another piece in a similar vein. What the shutdown says about the future of the Democrats. Another part of the change, he says, is that the Democrats, little bit by little bit, are becoming more like Republicans. Critics of our polarized conditions who have blamed both parties equally don't understand that the parties are fundamentally different creatures. The Republican Party is a movement party. The Democratic Party is not. So it's been a different story. He just, again, reiterating what Matt Grossman wrote about in his book. In addition, when asked to place themselves ideologically, Tomasky says, 43% of Republicans said they were conservative compared to 20% of Democrats who call themselves liberal. More Democrats said they were moderate, and 19% of Republicans said so. Even about 10% of Democrats said they were conservative or slightly so. And on the Republican side, the comparable numbers were negligible. And he even quotes Grossman and Hopkins in their book, and that's what some of the research is from. So this started changing in the latter part of the Obama era as rank-and-file Democrats become impatient for their party's leaders to endorse much bolder approaches to inequality and other economic challenges, and that impatience drove the enthusiasm behind Bernie Sanders' campaign. And Chuck Schumer himself, the Democrats' leader in the Senate, is not himself a to-the-barricades kind of guy, Tomasky writes, which is true, very true. But in the wake of the 2016 election, he's been in tune to where things are headed. He added Mr. Sanders to an expanded leadership team. In last year's contest for a new chairman, Mr. Schumer backed Representative Keith Ellison. And now he's led his party into a possibly risky government shutdown. It's not because he's a different person or because he's somehow tougher than Harry Reid. It's because the Democratic base demands it in a way the base would not have, I believe, he writes, a decade or so ago. So for now, liberals should cheer this unreservedly. For one thing, the cause of these young undocumented Americans is a good one. Actually, doing the right thing is kind of a cool thing to get behind. But more broadly, he writes, the Republicans have been playing this way for years. If Democrats won't, they'll just lose. You can't bring a squirt gun to the OK Corral. At the same time, there are longer-term concerns that citizens should keep in the back of their minds. Pretty much the same point Grossman made. Not about the Democratic Party, but about the Republic. Democrats are still several years away from becoming a movement party in the way Republicans are, and it's not necessarily fated to happen for a host of reasons, ranging from psychological differences between liberals and conservatives to the simple fact there aren't as many liberals as there are conservatives. But if it were to happen, if we were to have two movement subsumed parties, we'd be in some pretty big changes. It would be more like a parliamentary system.
Yes.
So that's nice. We'll keep that in mind, but, after we win.
Right. Okay. Yes, that's a good plan. We'll get parliamentary on you after that.
Well, how's it all playing? Meanwhile, here's a new poll from the Washington Post, ABC. Women in independents drive advantage for Democrats ahead of midterm elections, post-ABC poll finds.
Okay. Go women.
Pretty much. I mean, when you look at the numbers, if you ask the generic ballot among likely voters, it's Democrats 54, Republicans 40. That's 14 points, and that's actually pretty big. And Democrats hold a 15-point advantage over Republicans who say they're absolutely certain they'll vote.
Okay.
And actually, our going to vote is larger than the registered voters. It's often the case that Democrats have a bigger lead among registered voters, and then when you look at likely voters, the lead shrinks.
Yeah.
This is the opposite.
Okay. I'm for that. I bet everybody will be changing their formulas shortly.
Right. And although a November poll showed a much tighter race among voters who reported turning out in the 2014 midterm election, the Democrats now hold a 9-point edge with this group, suggesting they may have less of a handicap with voters in low turnout contests. In other words, how do you figure out what a likely voter is? One way to do it is say, well, did you vote in 2014? The last time it wasn't a presidential election, the last off-year election. And if you look at those voters alone, the Democratic lead is growing.
Okay. That seems like a good thing. Did you vote in the last one where the president who was with a porn star? Was that?
Well, the presidential elections are different than non-presidential elections.
Right,
so kind of tough to do that.
Dang. Okay. Armando points out, is this right? This poll, the ABC Washington Post, I guess it predates the shutdown.
Yeah,
everything does.
Everything does. They did it from January 15 to 18.
Yeah. So it was looming.
But everybody knew it was coming, but it hadn't started yet.
Right. Okay.
And in fact, the only way you're really going to be able to get an idea of how this hits people in the polls is wait about 2 weeks.
Right. Well, yeah, you still have to let people have it sink in with them that the government is shut down. Then you have to call them, and sometimes they're not home, and you know how it goes.
Who is it? Benjamin Woody had a kind of clever look at this. He said the shutdown's going to last 15 days.
Why is that?
How do you know it's going to last 15 days? Well, it takes a week to poll, and then it takes another week for the people losing in the poll to argue that they're really not losing.
Yeah. Okay. This might be right.
And that takes you to 15 days.
Yeah, well, okay. So I guess the proposal that's out there is 3 weeks CR, just a little bit longer than that. I guess
February
they're
8th.
they're looking to avoid that poll, I guess.
Right. I don't think that there is enough. Just because McConnell promises to bring it to a vote, that's promising. But
that's all it
there
is.
has to have something on the House side.
Yes.
If you don't have anything on the House side, it's a complete waste of time, and they should stay closed.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's it's certainly a good read of where McConnell is and what it means to get a promise from McConnell to have a vote. One, he might be lying, and even if he's not, it might just be ineffectual, since Ryan will just say we're not taking that bill up.
Yeah, I mean, the House side, the Republicans feel like they're in a good position, and they're just going to say no, and that's the end of it, and you can't make us.
Yeah.
And that's, on day 3 of the shutdown, day 1 of a, work week shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to take a little bit longer, a little bit more to bring them to the table. And then part of this, in terms of the dynamics of how this works, is stepping back and looking at the role of the president. And as you mentioned at the top of the show, President Bannon, who's no longer there, President Miller, and President Kelly.
Yeah.
And I think I'm persuaded by the pundits who point out, it's a waste of time unless you want to just tweak him. Talking about President Miller and President Kelly, they're just functionaries. And if you fire them, Trump will just hire somebody else to fit that role.
Yes. Although I like that as a theme.
His role is to not make decisions, but pretend he does. Just like on The Apprentice.
Yeah. That's true. I like the idea. Well, first of all, I like to just tweak the president to the extent that that's possible.
I'd love to see Miller fired. He's a Nazi. I don't care. But it's not going to change things because the problem is Trump is the point.
Right. Although I think that point is perhaps best made by having him go through a succession of advisors, and then people notice every single one of them sucks. It must be him.
Yes. So, of course, as Chuck Schumer pointed out over the weekend, the art of the deal, you can't negotiate with this guy. It's like negotiating with Jell-O. Because he doesn't have any firm positions. He doesn't know what he wants.
Right.
He doesn't know how to get it. And basically what he's done is he's turned everything over to Kelly and Miller and everybody else. And the senators have come to the realization late to the table. I mean, sometimes I think that our own people in government are the clueless ones, that you can't do anything with Trump. You have to do it by yourselves. And that's why Schumer and McConnell are talking to each other.
Yes. Well, that's almost always the real case at bottom. But usually the president
he's not even playing a symbolic role.
Yeah.
He's not playing a statesman like come to my office and we'll, he's doing nothing except making it worse. And if you talk to him, it's worse than if you didn't talk to him. Yes.
He does occasionally do the come to my office thing, but now they've twice been to his office and twice found that, that there's somebody whispering in his ear. Jafar is there. That's the problem.
Yeah. Stephen Miller's Jafar in that regard. So, what happened is he did invite somebody. He invited Chuck Schumer, and the House Republicans got all upset about it because they thought they were going to get sold out. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that they didn't, and now they're all happy because they think they can go along with that hardline DACA presentation that they have waiting in the wings there that I read to you a little bit of. There's a lot more in that, but it's like really bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awful proposal universally, and the people who are expert in it are picking it apart. And we need the time. Maybe a longer shutdown would give us that time to take a look at exactly what House Republicans are proposing and how awful it is. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm not, I don't know. We'll see how the first workday goes and what the stories are like.
Well, we'll see what the vote is, and we'll see whether the Democrats cave or they don't cave. We're so conditioned to them caving that we sort of expect that they will, but I don't know that they will. I don't think they have the votes. And one other piece in here, which is complicating things in terms of trying to, get everybody on the same page. On the one hand, you have the red state Democrats who are up for re-election, and on the other state, on the other hand, you have the I don't know, the Gang of 20, the Democrats who are going to be running for election.
Okay.
In 2020.
Is that
the Cory Bookers, the Kamala Harrises, the Kristen Gillibrands.
Is that a gang already?
They are. Well, it's a pretty large group, and I think they're all interested in making speeches. And I don't know if they're going to be interested in backing down on anything. That may be a good thing for us if we want to, keep the toes to the fire. But you're going to have clashes between that group and the group who are running for re-election this year.
All right.
So that's just a dynamic to keep an eye on.
You know that you're wrong. I'm reading already.
Oh, I guess, let's see. That must be Armando?
Yes. Though I'm not certain what this is, entirely certain what this is about, but
it never matters.
Yeah, right. It doesn't make a difference. I'm not sure.
It makes no difference whatsoever.
Yeah, I could see if I could add him, but I don't know. What's your?
No, I don't have 45 minutes. So.
Okay. Well, I'll give him rebuttal time. I think the best we can engineer. But
anyway, the bottom line is I think they should hold the line. I don't think that they should agree to anything today. I think that there's a lot more work to be done, and I think that the Republicans need to come more toward our position before we say anything about yes.
I think that's probably a wise thing to do. I'm not certain why that wouldn't be. I see that there's some nuance to what he's trying to put on, but I'll leave that for his segment, I think. We'll have to
Good. I hope he comes on and talks about it a little bit. These are all fascinating dynamics, and I think they all have a lot to do.
This is happening in the caucus meeting.
With what's happening within the Democratic Party itself. And Armando's been working, double time on that, trying to set up the presidential election primary issues that he's been working on, caucuses versus primaries, and how the party sees itself and so on and so forth. I think all of that is mixed in to how the Democrats are approaching this whole shutdown, because, again, at the heart of it is a Republican hardline look at immigration, which I think that we just find unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, they have to be able to bake that into the reaction that they give for the noon vote, and I'm sure that's the discussion over breakfast this morning. Is how do we sell this if we want to move towards compromise and reopen the government for the time being? What's that going to do? How's that going to be viewed? And does it get us anything? So we'll see what the decision is when they come out around. Well, what's it scheduled for? Noon today, huh?
Something like that. I think 12 or 12:30. Okay. But in any case, again, it was, as we said at the very beginning of the segment, it's all about what Ryan is or isn't going to do. It's much more about Ryan, less so about McConnell. That's why we're talking about the Good Laddie proposal.
Does he have an E on the end of that? I can see it. It's written there. Lad. Good laddie, good latte. Yeah. You think
Bad
maybe?
Lad. I don't know.
I don't know how that's supposed to be. All right. Well, thanks very much, Greg. I think this is a good start on these things. And anything else we need to shoehorn in before your departure today?
Oh, I think we'll just do a really generic summary here. This was very well put together by Ariel Edwards-Levy over at HuffPost. 5 things the polls show about Donald Trump's first year. And so these are really quick. 1, his approval rating started off really bad.
Yes.
And 2, the numbers nonetheless are relatively stable. So they don't go up, they don't go down, and we've no longer expected them to. It's the only stable thing about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Number 3, opinions of Trump are deeply polarized, but he inspires more robust opposition than support. We saw that in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, where the extremely opposed doubled the extremely support. And that's been true all along. Number 4, views of the economy are way out of whack with views of the presidency. People feel better about the economy than they do Trump, although they tend to credit Obama with it. And number 5, Trump's low approval rating probably matters for this year's election, so we shall see.
Okay.
So with that, I think the polling does matter. I think that right now the Democrats are still in a pretty good position. I don't think that they should fold. I don't think they should agree with McConnell unless McConnell can bring Ryan on board. That's usually where the president comes in. And since he's absent, it's going to be a difficult thing, and therefore I wouldn't expect everything to get all wrapped up this afternoon. And that's my wrap-up of the entire segment here. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning, Armando's in the wings. And he'll come on and after having only half listened to what I said, explain how everything I said was wrong, at least the part that he heard.
Yes. All right. Well, we have room for that. So, okay. Thanks, Greg.
It's one of the best parts of the show.
Yeah, this is like, it parallels what's happening right now in the Senate.
David, Armando, and I have known each other for like over a decade, and it parallels our usual discussions when we have them in those rare occasions in real life.
Yes.
So take care and enjoy the show. It'll be fun.
I'll take your word for it.
No, it will be. Enjoy it, David.
Oh, me? Oh, right. Then I will.
Everybody else out there, you can listen to.
Right. Oh, welcome. You're in the... Okay. So, all right. Thanks very much, Greg.
All righty. Take care.
Let's do that, and we'll open the doors for Armando, and I might run out the back door. That'd be a funny thing. Just answer the call and then just take off. I think he'd like that, actually. But do give us a call, Armando, and see if we can clarify any points of contention here. I think there's some language cleanup called for here. Not that anything's been. It's not like we're describing other countries as assholes or anything like that. It's just there's delicate issues at stake. Here we go. Let's see. We'll add Armando here. Good morning, Armando.
I called in the joint thing. I wonder if that would work in the future.
It might. I can't tell you. This whole thing, who knows? I haven't been able to figure out the new version of Skype, and neither has anyone else for some reason.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that I pressed the wrong button. I was trying to get you, but then I got the conversation, and I'd actually be curious if that would be the way to do the joining. Anyway, something to try at some future date.
Yes. Okay, so we found out everything was wrong or possibly not.
No, it wasn't. I mean, I didn't like him saying caving. I mean, I just think it's a tough spot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough spot. Remember, I'll give you just one example. Doug Jones is a yes on the last CR, even without even this phony promise from McConnell. By the way, I know it's a phony baloney promise.
It is.
My argument is just a little different than everybody else's, I suppose, and maybe mine's too convoluted, and that's why it doesn't work. And as Greg said, Greg was right.
Oh. He was wrong about being wrong. I knew it.
Yeah, see, he's always wrong. There's always a way to find Greg being wrong.
That's all it takes.
But he was right at the end where he said, look, we can argue about what the magic words are that McConnell needs to say and what, should he have to bring it to a vote before February 8th or not. I mean, those nuances don't get through. And I don't see this exercise as, this is the way we're going to solve the problem. It's frankly just setting up the next fight, in my view.
Right.
And the question is it smarter to set up the fight to have McConnell, and if you could get him, but no one seems to be talking about it. And I think that's the missing component. I wish, frankly, Schumer would have said, instead of talking about, the exact language McConnell used, which I understand the point, but I just think the bigger picture is, the biggest miss is, where's Paul Ryan?
Yeah.
Because, what happens? Do you believe or disbelieve McConnell? I don't, but suppose by some miracle he does bring it to a vote, and suppose it passes.
Yeah.
Then what? If Ryan doesn't bring it to a vote, you've got nothing.
That is true.
Now you've given Senate Democrats cover one as suppose, hey, we passed it, but that doesn't really do anything for dreamers, it seems to me, and I'm not sure it's that valuable politically. They said, okay, we gave you your vote, now vote, now open the government. You see where I'm getting at?
Right.
I mean, you've got to get it where Ryan is breaking his word as well, and so he has to have the pressure to bring it up for a vote as well. Of course, the problem with even that is, as you guys discussed earlier, there is a proposal that the Republicans have that has some type of DACA protection, except it's a complete sham, and it's got 8 million poison pills.
Yes.
So they can say, hey, I brought it up for a vote too.
That's true. They can do that, and they're That's why, I mean, I guess the focus really needs to be on a solution rather than a proposal that we can reject. I could do that.
I agree with all that. The only argument I would make is, and when I started this, is take a fellow like Doug Jones, specifically Doug Jones, possibly other red state Democrats. He said he's a yes because he promised CHIP or whatever. Healthcare is the whole thing for him. All right. If you take this CR, as I understand it, if it's no longer operative, then this isn't even worth discussing. They can't have pulled CHIP out of this. I'm assuming CHIP is still in this, even the 6-year CHIP.
Okay.
You get that, you take it off the table. Well, Doug Jones, in theory, is now back on your side.
True.
And maybe McCaskill's on your side. You've already lost 5. You can only lose 4 more because you have to figure all the Republicans will go toe the line if they're the 50th vote. So you've really just got to count Democratic heads, it seems to me. And you've lost 5. And Manchin's never coming back, and Heitkamp's never coming back. Donnelly's never coming back. But can you bring back Jones and McCaskill? And conversely, who can you lose on the other side? Well, you've got Tester. He might bolt on you. He's in Montana, red state. Bill Nelson's in a very tough spot. I think he actually holds tough myself personally, but people would put him as a prime candidate for defecting here on this vote. By the way, the reporting right now, as of 15 minutes ago, was there wasn't going to pass. They do not have.
Okay.
They do not have enough Democratic defections to get it done. Look, of the Republicans, and I guess we should explore just briefly, who voted no, you've already got Flake and Graham have flopped. That leaves you Paul and Lee, I believe, on the other side, and they're going to cave in crunch time. They always do.
Yeah.
Right? When has Rand Paul ever actually stuck to it? Never.
I can never really think of it.
Yeah. Hey, say what you will about Ted Cruz. He was the one guy who said, I'm not voting for it. I'm not voting for it. I'm not voting for it. And he didn't vote for it. And, of course, we all make fun of him because of that. But he did not roll over back in 2013. He just got overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So I think that you got to think about this strategically, and really, even if the strategy is, well, we're going to just shut the government down till there's a DACA, how you do that is important. I think, frankly, even with just the McConnell offer, but I would make a big stink about Ryan not being on board now and saying, listen, we're doing this, Mr. McConnell, now, and we thank you for your promise, but let it be known now that if Paul Ryan doesn't permit a vote, we're shutting it down again. I would go ahead and put that marker on the table now. I would take this deal and say, okay, we're going to work on this for 3 weeks, but if it's not done in 3 weeks, we're back where we started. And it's about you guys not allowing a vote. The reason I would frame it that way is because if you can make this about dreamers, right now it's like this and that, and there's 8 million issues. The whole kickoff of this shutdown was kind of weird. The issue was not really framed as just DACA. It was talked about, but there's 8 million other things said, And I just think that it doesn't even have to, and the way to be reasonable about it is to say, and I don't even need a guaranteed win. I'm not saying you have to pass DACA. I'm saying let the Congress do what it's supposed to do. Vote on proposals. So that's how I would do it. And even if at the end of the day I'm going to never give in until I get the exact DACA I want, I think you can set this up better and make it about broken faith with the dreamers, etc. If you sort of set this deal up where it's about promised votes. And then they break their promises, and then that's when you walk out. And I think you're going to be in a better position for setting it up. Plus, frankly, it gives you a breather and a respite from the shutdown situation you have now. And you can really just re-energize it again, I believe, on February 8th. And with the March 5th deadline for DACA, it really makes it all about, countdown to DACA expiration type countdown clocks. And I just think it's a better position to argue it. Nobody agrees with me from what I can tell.
That may be the case. I will say that I think there's some value in continuing the shutdown without interruption, but I'm not positive that it's the all-time winning
open to
strategy.
this thought. Tell me how that plays.
Well,
out.
I'm actually it wouldn't necessarily work in every situation, but I think the impatient, impetuous child president that we have actually ends up turning up the heat on Ryan or all Republicans as he grows increasingly frustrated, misses parties, misses golfing. I don't really know what convinced him to stay in Washington. The idea that
it's not like he did anything.
To do the right thing or whatever. It
was optics.
That was essentially it. But I'm amazed that he got it, or if he got it. Probably somebody.
I don't know that he
said,
he
"I'm not bringing the car out front. You can't go."
the helicopter's in the shop.
Yeah, right. It's just, his hairstylist was, I guess, non-essential later. That's how he showed up in the Oval Office for photos, allegedly, yesterday and the day before in his hat. One of his Make America Great Again hats, I think. By the way, I'm talking our way out in the last 20 seconds to our break. I know the music doesn't come through anymore to cue you in on that, but we'll discuss a little bit more about this. If you can hang on, I'll see if we can outline some of the reasons why it might not be time to reach an agreement just yet. But again, like you, I can be convinced in the other direction. We'll talk about that after the break.
And the RBC.
Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We have our short top of the hour break. That's just 1 minute, so good because Armando is still with us and already raring to go. Let's just for a second here, though, if you can hold the thoughts on what's been going on at the DNC, as much as that's been occupying your time. With respect to this the shutdown, I do think that we have an additional card to play in all this, and that's the growing frustration of Donald Trump himself and the spectacle of watching him rattle around the White House with nothing to do in all of this. I also think maybe there's an analog to the earlier successful deployment of the President Bannon theme that irritated Trump to no end. But maybe we can play that over in the Congress. I think that there is there's some value to watching Schumer and McConnell negotiate and have Schumer say, okay, but what I really need is to hear from the other guy who's actually holding the keys, Ryan, and see if you can infuriate McConnell to the point where you're like, oh, the real player here is Ryan. Now, normally the real player here is McConnell, but his intransigence or the intransigence of, I guess, of the Freedom Caucus and a number of votes that he doesn't control, I think gives you the opportunity to say, this guy has out-crazied you, and now the lunatics are definitely running things. I wish it was you, but I know that it's not. So, okay, you're going to give me a vote on whatever date, and that's nice, and I might even choose to believe you. But is it going to be worth anything? And for that, we need the word of the lunatics. And the guy who's the, nominal head of the lunatics isn't here in the meeting. Now, I don't trust his word either, but you're one step removed from the other guy I don't hardly trust. You've lost control of the party here. He doesn't have it either, but he's closer to it than you are. And I wonder what that would do with McConnell. I don't know.
That's actually an interesting point to say. I demand a three-way negotiation of this. I need Paul Ryan in the room.
Yeah, you and I can negotiate when we're going to have a vote. We all know what happens to that is it gets handed over to the House, and they, even if we had a solid deal that made sense for everybody, they would kill it because they hate you. Don't forget that. There's a huge faction of the House that hates you, Mitch, and what are we going to do about that? I appreciate your willingness to bargain, but so what? I don't know. I hate to disappoint you, but we got to talk to the people who hate you. That's the problem. So I wonder what that would do with him. I don't know that an infuriated McConnell is a better negotiating partner. I don't think so. I think maybe an infuriated Trump is not because you'll get to a deal. You won't. He'll do anything he can to blow up a deal when he's infuriated. But he'll do it in such a way that everyone will say, oh, my God, look at this guy.
Yeah, there's one other consideration on this strategy, it seems to me, is that for better or worse, both Graham and Flake have been helpful to the Democrats in the last few days. Graham particularly went after Miller very harshly, had a fight with Cotton. And you're really getting a lot of stories out there now that Miller's the one calling the shots. Some Kelly, but, the press looks at that uniform and they swoon. So Miller's the better target, really. So I think, to me, to the degree that you can make the story about Miller as opposed to Kelly, even though Kelly's really the problem. Because Kelly could throw Miller out of the room if he wanted to. It's pretty clear. He doesn't want to.
Yes. I mean, I think you're right. He's a bigger problem, but Miller's an easier target. He's a kid. He's a sleepy-eyed doofus.
He's a punk kid. If you've ever seen him you must have seen him. He is the most annoying little jerk that you can see. I mean, which is saying something for the people in that White House. He's the one who's by far the worst.
Yeah.
And also you get Cotton, who is also basically Miller-esque in his jerkiness.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of play, but I'll tell you what I do think is fair. It's a few days of figuring out what your negotiating power is here right now before you give up this particular shutdown and schedule a second one at some point in February. I think that's fair. I don't think they have to agree today, particularly since there's nothing where Ryan's even near this. They somehow need to rope him into this, it seems to me. So, give it a couple days of seeing if you can get Brian. Now, look, people will say that's heartless. What about the people who work for the government? There's hundreds of maybe millions of people who have been furloughed. And that's true. And there's no guarantee that they'll get their back pay and everything will be fine. But the reality is every time we've gone through this, they have. So, but I understand the hardship. And by the way, everything I'm thinking about and talking about isn't just for political gain, though I think it's an important component for the actual objective, which, for me anyway, is to reinstate the DACA protections. And getting CHIP. And I know there's many other things we'd like to get, but here's the truth. And we got to be honest about this. We lost the last election. We don't get a complete power to dictate everything we want. We have to pick and choose. And, the silly wall thing, they gave him all the funding he wanted. Durbin had given all the funding that was asked for by the administration on border security. And that was part of the Graham deal.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, what do you want? Well, I want $20 billion. And this actually, before we go to the DNC, I have a procedural question for you. We agreed to give him $20 billion. Authorized $20 billion. Is that different from appropriating? And how much can be appropriated at this time? Or can all of it be appropriated at this time?
Well, authorizing is different from appropriating. A CR would be an appropriation, though. So it might be an unauthorized appropriation, but those things happen, and if you can gather the votes for it and or structure the rule that way for it in the House, you can do what you want. But I don't know whether there's. I'm thinking back whether there was any. Has there been an authorization for this? I'm not really sure. It might be something that they did manage.
Out of the CR you're talking about, or just generally?
Generally, I mean, But I don't think it
They
would.
never passed a budget. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't think
Right. So that wouldn't. Yeah. I imagine it can be.
I mean, regular order has been thrown out the window.
Yeah. Right. So it's hard to even try and figure that out. And I suppose if you're talking about something in the context of a deal like this, then you're really talking about getting everybody's agreement either to not raise points of order against unauthorized appropriations just to allow the deal to go through, and the rules won't matter in that sense. If everybody just agrees to waive them or set them aside, or there are enough votes gathered, if there are 60 votes, you can waive certain points of order against unauthorized appropriations, etc. I don't know where the money comes from. I don't know where the figure came from. I don't know whether there was ever any attempt. I can't think of any opportunity in this Congress that has passed nothing to have passed that authorization. But
no, I don't think there is any. There
so.
wasn't even an ask. That's the whole point.
Maybe
they never
not.
asked for $20 billion before.
No, the Mexicans were supposed to come up with it. So
right,
who knows?
Yeah, but now it's later reimbursement. I think is the new MAGA.
Yeah,
Make America great again. Get a later reimbursement.
Right. It'll work out just great. We'll get a later vote, and that's a promise. And Mexico will certainly come up with money somehow for no particular reason, based on something that doesn't exist, and pay us back. Thanks for building the wall. We really love it. I don't know. I'm not certain what that's.
Complete aside that has nothing to do with anything. You remember Don Imus?
Yes.
Apparently he's retiring.
Now? Just now he's getting to that?
I know. You mean he was retired?
Yeah,
I mean he's alive?
Basically.
The thing about Imus, of course, is that, he's retiring. He's 77. But he had the Morning Joe slot, and all those Washington people used to call him I-Man and act like idiots. It was the funniest thing. But then he had his racist moments and was relegated to the Fox Business Network or whatever.
Is that where he's been? Okay.
I believe so, yes. He's been on the Fox Business Network with Lou Dobbs.
All right. Well, good. Enjoy your retirement.
No, I just thought it was funny because if you've been following politics for 25 years, you'll remember he was a important part of the ecosystem in the 90s, and so it's just kind of funny. Joe Scarborough has not always had that slot. That used to be
Morning Joe.
Imus's.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, to get back to your thing, I don't know how it would work, and it sounds like what you're telling me is if they get the votes, they can do pretty much what they want.
Yes.
But he can't possibly spend the $20 billion in a year. So the next question is, does that appropriation extend indefinitely? Is it there until Congress undoes it, if they do undo
it? I don't really know.
Okay, just a thought. I just was wondering how permanent this idea of the wall really was in terms of the $20 billion, because there really is impossible to spend $20 billion to build a wall in 1 year.
No, and there are mechanisms. the appropriators know what to do with appropriated but unspent funds in the next round of appropriations bills, whether it's individual actual subcommittee appropriations bills or one giant omnibus or CR, can reprogram unspent funds the next pass. That much I'm pretty well aware of. So if they spent $20 billion, or they appropriated $20 billion, and $2 billion of it got spent, they can recapture and reprogram that money without necessarily adding more to it. But if once it gets out that there's a pool of money out there, they'll find ways to spend it pretty quickly on consulting fees or what have you.
Yeah, that's true. The Make America Great construction company.
Yeah. Nobody who builds the thing is going to get any money. It's going to be people who, my company is building prototypes to meet the stupid transparency.
I could see a $1 billion contract for whitefish in the future.
Yes, right. It's time to to line up and pick up your winnings on that.
It's funny. Well, by the way, breaking news: for the first time in a long time, the Supreme Court on its Monday, which is usually opinion day, has actually released some opinions. There have only been one opinion issued in this entire term since the October session. Right? Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
And apparently something happened. Three opinions. One was unanimous about something, so it probably wasn't controversial.
Yeah.
There was something out of the D.C. circuit called Artist versus D.C. It was 5-4. Roberts joined the liberal bloc. Kind of interesting. I don't have the foggiest clue what the case is about.
Yeah.
And then there was another relative 7-2 decision. Well, not even. It was 8-1. I don't know what any of these opinions are about, so I can't even give you any information.
But is this the first ones issued in the term? Is that what you're saying?
No, this is actually, there's only had been one, so these are the first since one. Generally, they start being issued in November.
Yeah, it's odd.
And by now, you probably have had 10 or 11, 12, and you had only had one. So,
well, this is not normal, among other things. Speaking of, I'll make one other weird procedural point. I think it was Sheldon Whitehouse pointing out over the weekend during the shutdown and negotiations, etc., pointing out that I guess the way Mitch McConnell's been running things on the floor, and maybe this has something to do with perhaps the validity of his promises on votes, etc. But it certainly served. I think he was offering it up to undermine the spin game that was going on. Oh, this is the Democrats' fault, and the Democrats want this, and then they're making all these demands. I hadn't realized this. There has not been a vote permitted on the Senate floor on a Democratic, well, certainly no Democratic bills to this point, but there hasn't even been a vote allowed on the Senate floor on a Democratic amendment to any Republican bills, save vote-a-rama proposals at the last minute on the budget mess. But regular bills coming to the floor, there hasn't been a single vote allowed on a Democratic amendment in all of 2017. The books are closed on 2017. Not once during calendar year 2017 did the Senate take up a Democratic amendment to a bill. But everything's fine. Regular order. We're right back where this is the way it's supposed to work. So you're totally getting your vote.
Yeah, which goes to a point that Donald Trump tweeted out yesterday, calling for nuking the filibuster again.
Oh yes, right. Even though it was incongruous to the discussion going on, because of course it wasn't a filibuster problem. It was that you don't have enough votes to make.
Yeah, they didn't have the votes anyway. Then at that point in time,
yes.
And it's just funny to hear it again, and it was like the Republicans in the Senate almost didn't even buy it. Come on, that's just him tweeting. Yeah. We don't really pay attention, which is funny because you talked about what's Trump doing in his house on this,
yes.
in our house, rather, the White House. He can't go to his house, which is Mar-a-Lago, for the optics reasons. And the idea that this is where you can get Trump antsy and maybe make him do a deal, maybe. And again, I even if not, I think that you'll let it play out a few days at least before you accept McConnell's proposal here. Though I do think a reset is a way to go here, because you get back one of the people, Jones, at least by his words, that he was voting for the CR because of Chip. You take that out of the play, and you frankly you recharge the batteries of the potential defectors. It seems to me if you reset it, but you know what? Who knows? Maybe I'm completely wrong. This is all guesswork. What's not guesswork? How about this for a segue? Is what happened at the RBC.
Okay.
the Rules and Bylaws Committee
them.
met, the Democratic National Committee's Rules and Bylaws Committee met on Friday and Saturday to take up the recommendations from the Unity and Reform Commission, which was appointed at the created and members appointed at the Democratic Convention in 2016. They took up those proposals. Just to give you a quick overview again, they had their superdelegate proposal, which you, I think, are pretty familiar with, David. We debated it enough. The caucus reforms, such as they are, and a bunch of internal stuff on transparency and financing reporting in the DNC, which I am not an expert on and I'm not particularly interested in. Anyway, I don't know, David, if you have insights on those issues.
I have not.
Okay, but let's look at the big ticket items, which I believe really are the nomination rules themselves. The superdelegate rule, which is the one thing that the DNC has complete and total control over. The URC had a series of negotiated proposals that frankly mirrored what was in the enabling resolution of the URC. So it was negotiated in 2016. It turns out that those proposals don't really work, just procedurally. There was a lot of talk about being bound or not bound and how you do the voting, and in essence, it's a mess. So the concept wasn't thought about so much. And it's just simply a lot of the old hands said, sorry, guys, what you guys proposed here just doesn't work in terms of the structure of it. So I don't know what happens next on that, but apparently it's just there were flaws in it that made it not work. It's not that people are saying, okay, let's not reduce the superdelegates, the voting superdelegates. It's like, well, the way you did it just doesn't work.
I'd like to know exactly what their objections were, because I had my own questions about it. I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up being, if they overlapped. I don't know how you'd work it out. You could work anything out, but it would be enormously difficult, for instance, to be on your way to a national convention with the state primary results in hand and 10 to 12 people who are expected to attend as superdelegates. And, like I said, for lack of... I can't guess for you who's going to be in contention next time, so we'll just overlay the existing template that we have of Sanders and Clinton and say if they were to run all over again, or if these rules were in place this time, you'd be talking about sending a delegation with 12, let's say, superdelegates in it, 9 of whom have been in the Clinton orbit for their entire lives and are Clintonistas through and through, and handing them rules that say 4 of you among the the 8, 4 of you are going to have to figure out which 4 have to vote for Sanders, because that's the way the outcome was in the state. And so, as between you, Mr. Chairman of the party for the state, and state the chair, the vice chair, the secretary, former chief of staff to the last Democratic governor, whoever, all you guys, 4 of you are going to have to take a hit and show up and vote Sanders. How do you want to work that out?
Well, that's actually one of the issues was about, well, do you report it as a state without saying how each individual person voted, things like that. But there was also just a simple, a different type of issue, which is the people who are most geographically tied to states and jurisdictions were actually going to be unbound. That is, elected officials. Mm-hmm. And then there's the very important people, superdelegates like former presidents and honored somebody or others. I forget what's in that category, and they're also exempt. And the people who were going to be bound, which is just the normal delegates, a good proportion of them like live in Washington, D.C. or Virginia or Maryland.
Yeah, right.
And, how do you proportion them? And they said, well, what do you do with these guys? They're they happen to live in the D.C. area because that's where they live, but they're not really tied to the Virginia Democratic Party per se. They're national Democrats. So what does that even mean? And I'm giving it short shrift. We should probably have Chris Reeves on sometime. Chris, David, as you may recall, is a COSAC who is a DNC member from Kansas. He's been very active in this. He's in a lot of the working groups. And I had a nasty fight with him, and then I had to apologize because I was completely wrong about something he said. But, he's such a mensch that he forgave me. But also, he just knows all about this, and we probably – would you mind if I try to get him on?
Oh, no, not at all. No, that'd be a great addition, and I'm sure he'd be if he's available in the morning.
If he's available, I think he'd be more than happy to do it. Let me reach out to him and see if we can set it up. There's another RBC meeting in March, so there's time enough to reset this and really get some expert points on all of these technical points from Chris, because he knows them like nobody's business. The other issue was this mandated neutrality from party officials in the states, state party chairs and whatnot. How do you define neutrality? You just said something that really goes to that point. Someone's been a Sandersnista or a Clintonista. Look, for example, the chairman of the Nebraska Democratic Party is Jane Klebb, and Jane is a very ardent supporter of Bernie Sanders. She's a board member of Our Revolution. She's on the Sanders Institute. So are we going to call her neutral just because she doesn't, quote, endorse Bernie?
Right.
It seems kind of silly.
By the way, I like the concept of having a board for Our Revolution.
I think it's pretty clear that she's a Bernie Sanders supporter and will be one. So it's kind of silly to pretend just because she doesn't say, I endorse, that her neutrality is going to be at issue. I think the better answer is this. If you have state primaries, the state party officials don't have any control of the mechanisms. They're just another Democrat, and they should endorse whoever they want. I mean, who cares?
I guess there's no reason why you couldn't empanel a different board for the purpose of engineering the primaries, and just say, and they wouldn't be necessarily appointed by the state leadership. I guess we're adept enough at having elections. I'd make a parallel. It's a very grandiose parallel, but for instance, I don't know. I got no other one to go with. The constitutional ratifying conventions,
delegates to run the primaries.
Yeah,
sort of idea.
Right.
That's an idea, but it seems like a lot of work. For nothing much.
Yes,
I'm not.
The other alternative is to say they're not going to be neutral.
They're not going to be neutral.
Right.
And let's be clear, unless they're holding a caucus, whether they're neutral or not doesn't matter, does it?
I'm sure eventually it will. You'll come up with something where finally a decision has to be made, and you obviously set that schedule to be favorable to your. Okay, I did.
What schedule?
I don't know anything. What the schedule for when the board meets to decide what the primary rules are going to be, or the date that they prefer, or I don't know. But eventually you'll run into it.
That's actually a fair point. Take both Nebraska and Idaho, for example. There, the state party is making decisions as to whether they will use the primary or hold their own caucus. And conceivably, in Washington State, these things could be everywhere, and they are real issues right now. Washington State held a caucus, even though there was a write-in primary that produced 500,000 more votes. And as you know, I've been fighting against that for some time now.
Right.
I know we're running against it. Is it 1021 or 1027?
27. So we're at 30 seconds. We'll talk our way back out into the next break.
Okay, David, and I do want to explore what matters most to me, which is this primary caucus conundrum.
Sure.
And I'll mash it with this neutrality issue.
Okay. Well, we'll have that on the other side of the break, and then we'll, I guess, wrap up and cover the other crazy stories that popped up over the weekend, which you're welcome to hang on for if you like. And we will be right back after our last break for the day, right after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back once again to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Armando's still hanging on, and lots of chatter still going on during the break. But let's see, let's extend things a little bit, but wrap up on what happened over the weekend and where we stand on rules in the DNC. Did you say that they're going to? Are we basically? We're still not done. There's going to be another rules meeting in a couple of months' time. This controversy drags on again.
It does.
Okay.
And just to give you the timing, the RBC will decide what gets submitted to the entire membership, and 2/3 of the membership has to approve whatever the RBC proposes.
Oh, my. Okay.
So it's a second step isn't even complete. They haven't even decided what they're going to submit to the membership for potential approval. So, yes, we got a meeting in March. I believe it's in Las Vegas. I could be wrong. No, it's in San Diego, I think. But
okay.
They'll supposedly have more refined and frankly, they say, fix the superdelegate mistakes that the URC made. As I said, Chris would know those details more than I. I would just eliminate voting superdelegates. You're an honorary delegate when it comes to voting for the nominee. Superdelegates have never changed a nominee, and they never will. This is one of the silliest arguments of all time. I don't care. I mean, to me, for appearance sakes, I would eliminate them all. I do care about more primaries. And the reason why is not candidate-centric. Believe it or not, I've been in this thing for 30 years. A lot more people vote in primaries than they do in caucuses. Now, they'll talk about their reforms. But they will do absentee ballot. But they did absentee ballot in both Washington and Nebraska in 2016. So that reform argument doesn't make sense. They'll say, well, we'll have a firehouse caucus where people can just walk in and drop off and leave all day. And it's like, well, what are you doing now? Might as well just do the primary when you have it available. Look, some states have to have caucuses, so these reforms are good to limit the voter suppression of the caucuses in those states that have them, which I think are down to about 10 now, maybe less, and they're mostly small states. Washington is now probably the last big state that has caucuses. All the rest are Iowa, Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, those type of states, which are mostly red, and there's nothing we can do, frankly, to force them to have primaries. There's nothing we can do to force anybody to have primaries, to be honest with you. But if they do give us a primary option, as Idaho does, as Washington does, as Nebraska does, the rule that was tabled and re-argued a bit at the end of the RBC meeting was simply this. If your state government runs a primary, you, state party, have to use the primary results and not suppress voters by holding a caucus to pick delegates.
Yeah, you said that.
It's a simple proposal. At this point, it impacts 3 states, but the principle is there, and it's basically doesn't allow state parties to backslide on this. So that's being argued about still. I have no idea what's going to happen with that. No one was much interested in it, but I kept screaming, and now I've got someone with a bigger megaphone screaming, and Adam Parkamenko, and he's got a petition out there. He even got Ben Nelson of Nebraska to endorse it. Interestingly enough, which was kind of funny. So that's going on still. I don't hold high hopes that that's actually going to make the cut, unfortunately. So I lose again, which, I'm used to losing on these things. So this is one more I'll probably lose, but there's still hope. I'm going to keep fighting for it and see where we go. But to tie it in back to the neutrality discussion, my proposal would eliminate the neutrality issue. Jane Klebb being for Sanders won't matter. What she has to do will be dictated by a rule.
Okay.
I don't know the Washington Democratic Party chair, and I don't know if Jay Inslee tells him what to do. Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington, but what's her? Is she neutral on these things? So in that sense, I kind of do see where neutrality for rulemaking comes into play. Now, the better solution is to have, as you said, all the rules made by people who aren't aligned with any particular candidate. But that's hard to do. Most of us in the Democratic Party, we choose candidates, people we like, people we endorse, people we support, people we donate to, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how we can really get around the neutrality rule.
No.
I just think you make clear, frankly, almost mandatory courses of action for the people in charge at the national level as much as possible, so that you don't have to worry about the neutrality question. Of course, then that's but what were they neutral? It's like, well, somebody's got to decide.
True.
And you've got to have 500 people who by showing up got to be members, DNC members. Well, that's part of what you entrusted them to do. They were elected. They went through the process. They showed up.
Yeah.
So they should have that right.
With them. It's an ongoing thing, and you'll always run into the opportunity, at the very least, if not to actually rig things. More frequently, you'll run into the opportunity for people who lose to say they lost because something was rigged. Just so long as you continue to also give them the opportunity to vote out the people that they think did the rigging, if they can organize it and facilitate it, and replace them with themselves so that they can have the experience of doing things fairly and then being accused of rigging them anyway and having the whole process start all over again and them getting voted out. This is an ongoing. You're never going to satisfy everybody. There's always going to be a loser in the situation, and the loser is always going to look for some reason other than they're losing positions for the loss. Okay, fine. So ultimately it comes down to votes, and if you can organize more people who think it was rigged than there were people who know it wasn't, you win. It was rigged, now you rig it, and then we'll get angry at you and unrig it next time. That's just the ongoing way it is, unfortunately, and it's why a lot of people hate internal party politics and why nobody wants to show up and run these things, because it's a never-ending headache. But some people are into it. Good, fine.
Yeah.
And we let them
I will say one thing, just as a purely politics and electoral concern issue on the timing of when the RBC votes and makes its decision. I do not think any decision by the RBC should be made until after the midterms. It simply don't want any. To me, you don't want anything interfering with this election. It's more important than these rules, because even my concerns aren't, generally speaking, aren't going to be result changing. The nominee's not going to lose or win, generally speaking, by the 50 or 75 delegates that would be in play. Though the Washington caucus could be. Again, I've always talked about that in that Bernie netted 50 plus delegates. I mean, he gained a 50 delegate margin. But Nebraska's 15 delegates, Idaho's 18 delegates or 14 delegates, whatever the numbers are. There aren't major numbers. And the other thing that I discovered for the first time, and I'll leave this as the last point, and it's not related to the URC at all. It's that there is an ongoing committee considering the primary schedule of what you're going to schedule. Traditionally we have Iowa, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. Those are the first four. And then anybody after there's different little structures for if you want to go later, you get more delegates, a few more delegates. If you go earlier, you get less, stuff like that. And they give different bonuses for rural versus urban, which I hate, but that's another one that I've lost consistently. But all these things are not going to be outcome determinative for the most part. And the 2018 midterm election is going to be just a real milestone for the battle against Trump. So in my view, even proposals that I am absolutely hepped up about, they can wait. Let the RBC come back next January with what's going to be proposed to the DNC, and then everybody can be mad about that and lobby and fight about that in the spring of 2019. And that's plenty of time. It gives everybody time to prepare. You announce your candidacy in April or May of 2019. Now you know the rules. You adjust your campaign to deal with them, and off we go.
Okay. Well, yeah, and to some extent, I guess everybody still fighting this needs to perhaps wonder whether they're fighting the last battle. I am a little bit curious about this, and I don't run into a whole lot of Bernie Sanders supporters who, when they're confronted about caucus versus primary, really fight hard for caucuses, and yet this isn't settled. So someone somewhere is doing it, but I wonder whether they might become convinced or start to think about the possibility of, it's a very different environment now. Bernie Sanders is a different person, occupies a different space in the political sphere than he did at the last time around, and you might not really need to rely on the ability to over-organize and therefore overweight a caucus versus a primary. You might just perform just fine in primaries next time around, and then you'll be annoyed because some other newcomer will steal your thunder in the caucuses that you fought to preserve. But okay.
Especially early primaries will be important and helpful to him because he's going to have all the money in the world, whereas, and other candidates will too. But, longer shots are going to be
He's not the long shot that he's not the unknown that he was at the beginning of the process.
Or the long shot. He's a second or third favorite at worst.
Yeah.
If Biden jumps in, he probably would be called the front runner based on polling and his ability to raise money and everything else. But after that, Kamala Harris is, a hot new name, and she's a good fundraiser, but her name recognition is nil.
Yeah.
That's true for just about everybody except Biden, Bernie, and Warren. And Warren is a notch below, definitely a step below those two. So, at this point, so. Bernie's the 800-pound gorilla.
So there you
go. So it really isn't that big a deal for him anymore. I'm not sure caucuses will be that much better for him. They will be better, but they won't be as pronouncedly better as they were. So, I wish we could be neutral in this sense, that instead of thinking about the candidate, we think, well, what do we want out of this process? I have one goal in it, and that is that the most people can vote for who their nominee for president is going to be. The presidency is the most important office in the country, in the world even. And, to talk about, mythical party building and we want this, we want that. That's not. This is democracy at play. We're talking about the person who will have hopefully at least a 50-50 chance to be the next president of the United States. What should be most important in this discussion is giving as many people as possible the opportunity to vote on who the nominee will be.
Yeah.
And, for me, I would say all primaries, and it's a popular vote. I wouldn't even break it down by state, but that's me. And I said, well, no one will go to Iowa. Well, no one should go to Iowa if there's not enough people. We're about people, not states. We're not about trees and empty space and cornfields. We're about where the people are. That's why this whole urban-rural thing is nonsense. But, everybody else has their views, and, you argue for them, and then somebody decides, or everybody decides together, and then we go out and fight it.
Yeah. Well, you got a couple more months to do it, and certainly if we can add Chris to the mix, that would be helpful. I'll look forward to seeing whether that can happen. To him
and see if he can give you some more insight. Chris is intimately involved. He's a great guy, and he will certainly have much more information on those things that I simply glossed over because they haven't been my focus. He knows about everything, including this whole superdelegates issue that we've discussed.
All right.
Anyway, let me give you back your 15 minutes to empty your pocket.
I will take it. Okay. Thanks very much.
All right.
All right.
Talk
Take
to you
care,
later.
Armando. All right. What do we want to hit on in the last couple minutes of the show? Let's see. Some further news about the 24-year-old top staffer at the drug policy office that we discussed the other day. What was his name again? Taylor Weyaneth. Remember this guy? He was a 24-year-old. He had basically had no jobs outside of college other than working on the Trump campaign, and through a couple of lucky appointments and a couple of sustained vacancies in offices and departures from higher office, he found himself as a high-ranking official in the National Office of National Drug Control Policy. And the thinness and even veracity of his resume was in question, just like many other appointees elsewhere in the Trump administration. I guess just one new twist on this. Apparently, previously, since we've been discussing his resume and how thin it is, previously dismissed from a job, guess during college, as an intern, I think, at a law firm. The headline here, Trump's 24-year-old drug policy appointee was let go at law firm after he, quote, just didn't show. Just wanted to let you know something about the quality of the best people, which Trump has promised repeatedly to hire for his administration. Just that's the latest news on him. While in college, late in 2014 or early 2015, this guy, Taylor Weyaneth, began working as a legal assistant at the New York firm O'Dwyer and Bernstein. He was discharged in August of 2015, partner Brian O'Dwyer said in an interview. And just this will give you a little bit of the flavor of, what kind of guy is this and what kind of guy is it that hired him, maybe. We were very disappointed in what happened, O'Dwyer said. He said that he hired Weyaneth in part because both men were involved in the same fraternity. That is a real thing. It actually happens that way from time to time. I must burn untold numbers of you to find out that that's really true. Anyway, that the firm invested time in training him for what was expected to be a longer relationship, like actual work. Instead, Weyaneth just didn't show. In a resume initially submitted to the government, he said he worked at the firm until April of 2016, though he was in fact fired in August of 2015. How interesting is that? When an FBI official called as part of a background check in January of 2017, the firm said Weyaneth had left 8 months earlier than the resume indicated, but that didn't get in the way, I guess, of his being placed in this job and working his way or falling his way up the ladder anyway. So, I don't want to dig too far into this guy's background because he's one of any number of Trump appointees who are garbage at their jobs and have embellished their resume beyond all recognition, and who don't deserve any position in government whatsoever. But I just thought I'd give you the latest on that one. Let's see. A new book coming out, I guess supposed to rival Michael Wolff's, except it's written by Howard Kurtz and no one cares, called, is this the title of the book? Defiance Disorder. I skimmed this morning. Defiance Disorder. Another new book describes chaos in Trump's White House. This reported in the Washington Post. Ashley Parker, I guess, writing up the pregame on this book. And basically it seems to tell us exactly the same story, but with less fun details, because Kurtz is such a button-down guy, and so we all have to take his milquetoast version of read the Michael Wolff book, I would guess. This doesn't seem to be revealing much of serious interest to me, and who needs to spend money on Howard Kurtz, quite honestly. But okay, the book's coming out, and so I expect to see perhaps some of the more controversial quotes and salacious details mined over the next couple of days, probably give us a story or two, and then Howard can be proud of himself for having made an impact. Let's see, other interesting things over the weekend, much to catch up on, lots of long reads that we'll need to catch up on. Here's a quick observation that I saw on Twitter. John Harwood came out with this one, CNBC reporter. Good point here in evaluating the shutdown situation, which may or may not find resolution in about an hour. In evaluating the reasonableness of both sides here, remember, in 2013, Republicans shut down government in the name of forcing Democrats to do something, that would be wipe out Obamacare, that 4 years later, when they didn't need Democrats at all, Republicans themselves couldn't and wouldn't do. So in evaluating their positions now, you should be thinking about the question of, are the demands that Republicans are making of Democrats, are they for real? Would they do them unilaterally even if they could? And there's some question mark about that because, of course, there are definitely some members of the Republican Party who look at the polling on, for instance, issues like DACA and say there's 80% support for a path to citizenship for these folks. I can't, you're not going to find me out there fighting against 80% support. And then we also know that there's a significant contingent that say, to hell with all of that, I want to punish brown people, and you're not going to cheat me out of the opportunity to do it. And they really would stick to their guns in these things. So I don't know, but it's definitely worth taking note of. The Hill has a story, or a headline anyway, that interests me. Brett Samuels writes this one. Trump unhappy, believe it or not, over Zinke's Florida offshore drilling exemption, according to a report. I don't know whether he's unhappy with the bad publicity or really thinks that there should be fracking off of the beach at Mar-a-Lago. I'm sort of curious about this. President Trump made it clear to Ryan Zinke, Interior Secretary Zinke, of course, that he was upset by the decision to exempt Florida from expanded offshore drilling. Axios reported Sunday Zinke did not coordinate with anyone, including the White House, before making his decision. And the move has likely hurt Zinke's image within the administration. So what? Axios reported. However, sources told the news outlet the issue has not ruined Zinke's relationship with Trump. Wait 10 minutes and it'll be fine again. The Hill has reached out to the White House for comment. Zinke said earlier this month he won't allow offshore drilling in waters near Florida through 2024. That came after a meeting with Florida Governor Rick Scott earlier to discuss the governor's objections, and then he came out and said, Florida's got too many nice beaches, so we're not going to do it. He probably thought that was a big favor to Trump. I don't know. Still, I guess no information from this report. I don't know whether Axios has any more information on why Trump was upset with that. Or really, actually, at this point, we have to wonder if he was actually upset with that. And in 10 minutes, he might not be upset with it anymore, and that'll be that. I mean, he's mercurial, to say the least. All right, let's see what other items I have open here. I guess as we approach the vote time and people begin to worry about whether or not Democrats, should they agree to a proposal to reopen the government temporarily, are caving or flipping or God knows what on the various issues, whether they be specifically DACA versus specifically the wall inside of the umbrella issue of immigration, or whether there's something else. This is interesting. I just opened this up a little while ago and saw that Luis Gutierrez had an interesting comment here, and I guess being reported in Talking Points memo, so perhaps we can open that up and skim through that. How some Democrats dropped their opposition to Trump's border wall. I did catch some minor grief the other day for sort of jokingly proposing that maybe the border wall, the construction of the wall, wouldn't be such a bad thing, in the sense that we need to have an enormous wall against which we need something big enough to fit all the people we're going to have to one day line up against the wall, wink, wink, when this whole thing finally collapses and we can, execute some justice, so to speak. But, we don't do that here in this country. But people were upset. I don't even want jokes being made about agreeing to build this evil, horrible wall. Well, it's interesting that I guess a variety of positions being taken on this stuff. But Gutierrez was quoted in the tweet anyway of saying, he said he'll build the border wall himself if that's what it takes to protect dreamers. So I guess, if you're looking for a position to be carved out with a protected flank in which you say, go ahead, take this money and say you're going to build a wall with it after promising that Mexico would pay for it, you're never going to come through on that. And as Armando pointed out, probably no way you're able to actually utilize the amount of money you're talking about within the next year anyway. But maybe you now have a protected flank if Luis Gutierrez is out there saying, you know what? The bigger issue here is protecting people, dreamers who are already here and deserve not to have, as Armando put it, faith broken with them. You know what? The wall, it's nonsense. It's unlikely to do a great deal. It's a gigantic waste of money. There's a terrible symbolism to it. But maybe, ultimately, when push comes to shove, it's better to let this, the buffoon in the White House think he's making headway on a project that won't do anything if it leads to legalized status, finally resolving the problems and doubt in the lives of hundreds of thousands of dreamers. So there's some point to be made there too. All right. We are just about out of time. It's time also this week to catch up on the latest on Jared Kushner and the risk he poses, both with his connections to China and with his continuing mysterious ability to have a security clearance. And also one other bit we'll add to the last minute or so, the amazing number of people who, as it turns out, have never completed their financial disclosures, despite the fact that they have actually completed their first year in government, and like, for instance, Dina Powell, on their way out of their official roles and into different roles, never having made complete disclosure, never having divested themselves of conflicts of interest, etc., etc. But just like Donald Trump himself, LOL, laws, haha, find me. I'm sure you'll be able to scare me into complying with your stupid laws and the Constitution when it comes to emoluments by reporting bad things about me. I'm sure I'll get right around to fixing that stuff. Just as we learned over the weekend, of course, that the Trump campaign was getting set to release and use, allegedly, some television advertisements basically saying, oh, Democrats, because they want to protect illegal immigrants, are responsible for every murder in the whole wide world ever, wherever it takes place and whoever did it, blah, 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 etc. That, of course, beyond the pale for sure, but what are you going to do? He's made the disclaimer saying, oh, I approve this ad, and he's still trying to distance himself from it. I didn't do it. It's the campaign, a totally separate entity. Can you imagine? This is the context in which we're dealing with this guy. All right. Plenty more, of course. I can't fit it all in, but you are lucky. You're in luck. You're always in luck. It's not luck. It's skill. You see, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam following up this program as it does every day will hit. I am positive. I can promise you. I like Mitch McConnell. I swear he will definitely cover all the stories we missed.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about a sampling of the things coming up? The DHS was not consulted, nor were its analysts used to compile the Trump administration report on terrorism. Remember that one? That claims to have come from the DHS. Gee whiz, that seems like an awfully odd claim to make if you didn't have anything to do with it. That and so many more stories coming up next on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.